his strength is, what his troops' capability are. He marches them straight into Cornwallis' army. At Camden, South Carolina, one of the major battles of this war, right in the middle of South Carolina, Camden. It's not a national park because we lost it. We lost it bad. His men were starving, but they had been eating green peaches and green corn and things, so they actually have a lot of unfortunate diarrhea going on in the troops, and that really was weakening them. But here's what he does. Horatio Gates at Camden, he's got Maryland and Delaware troops, as well as a large number of militia. And he puts his militia on his left. When they line up, by putting his militia, and y'all know militia are not trained soldiers. There was hardly any training whatsoever to begin with, but except here at Valley Forge. So the Maryland and Delaware line were actually well trained. But again, militia are not well trained at all, if training of any kind. Here's the thing. A militia soldier, when he put him on his left, that puts them on Cornwallis's right. And on Cornwallis's right is his troops, his honor guard, his crack troops. The best troops in the world. Some of the best equipped, trained, disciplined troops in the world. The British Army. And they're on his right, facing the militia. Now here you are. Think about this. People say, the militia, they were never reliable, they were useless. Well, they would often throw down their weapons and run screaming. I think I would have too. And this is why. I'll cover it. This is a common weapon of the time. You all may have seen these before. This is actually a French musket. Yeah, because y'all know the French entered this in May. This is what Washington learned while he's at Valley Forge, that the French are now in this fight. They've joined the war. That's a huge thing. We may not have won this if it hadn't been for the French. This is a musket, a French Argo musket, flintlock, and it's not loaded, I promise you. And if you're familiar with this weapon, this was the common weapon of the time. The soldiers would use it, but most of your militia didn't have a musket. This is a smooth bore weapon like a shotgun, if you're familiar with that. A lot of those militia down there had rifles, because this is a very inaccurate weapon. If you're trying to shoot deer or squirrels, you're not going to hit much of anything. Unless there's a whole herd of them and you might hit something in there. Okay? It's not accurate really beyond 50 yards. But it is the weapon of choice for the military at the time. The musket. The French would supply us with thousands of these eventually, and a lot of other equipment. But if you're a militia person, think about this. Here you are. You're in the militia. You either have a musket or you have a rifle, which is even more common. And probably the only other weapon you have is a tomahawk or a knife, like a Bowie knife. Very, very common to carry these at the time. All right, and you're standing there in a line facing the British. And the British had the most deadliest weapon of the Revolutionary War, right here. And they're trained better than almost any soldier in the world to know how to use it. So imagine there you are. You have got a rifle, maybe a gun, and a tomahawk, and you've got hundreds, sometimes if not thousands, of British troops charging down the field at you with this. Now, your musket, you can load that maybe once every 15, 20 seconds, but if I see hundreds of British soldiers come screaming down the field at this, I might wet my pants first before I get that gun loaded again. Okay? You got thousands. These guys are going to come. If they come up to you, they're going to run you through. And they're very efficient. And they would do this time and time again. In fact, the British build their empire with the bayonet, the most dangerous weapon. And they do this. And at the Battle of Camden, South Carolina, that's what they do. They charge our militia. The militia drop and run. They run, and you can't hardly blame them. They get a shot off or two. It takes you 15 to 20 seconds at least to load this. Now, I'm in my 50s, but I can still cover a lot of ground in 15 to 20 seconds. So if you haven't got me, I can come up with you pretty fast. If you have a rifle, it takes you upwards of a minute or better to load it. Although they're much more effective and they could reach out and touch you, and our marksmen were very good with rifles. However, a rifle does not take a bayonet at the time. And it can take you a whole minute to load it. There can be a whole lot of people poking you full of holes in a very short period of time. Because these forces would often be just 30 to 50 yards apart shooting at each other. All right? Remember, if you're very young, how far can you run in 15, 20 seconds or a whole minute? You can cover 30, 40 yards, easy, with a bayonet. That's what would happen at Camden. It would happen many, many times in this war. The militia would often run. They weren't trained, disciplined. They didn't go to basic training. Even their officers were often selected. They were just chosen. Many of them were, say, they're preachers from their church. Led quite a number. Muhlenberg, he's kind of famous in the area here. He was a chaplain. He was a preacher and led of Virginia. What do preachers know about killing and fighting? Well, some of them had to learn, but they had to learn right in the middle of the war. This is what happens, folks. So Camden is a huge, huge loss. We lose another whole army. We're devastated. The militia break and run. Tarleton's dragoons circle behind the Maryland Delaware line and start cutting them to pieces, and they have to surrender. Gates, they say they find him